At Thanksgiving, my uncle said, "We're all proud of our doctor, lawyer, and engineer. Too bad you're just a teacher." 2 days later, his son applied for a job at my school. I was the principal. When I introduced myself, his jaw dropped. "Remember me?" I asked, smiling. The room went quiet, but not because of gratitude. My uncle had just finished listing the family's real successes: a doctor, a lawyer, and an engineer, then turned to me with a smirk and said, "Too bad you're just a teacher." I was seated between my cousins passing mashed potatoes when the comment landed. No one defended me. A few chuckled. I smiled, but inside I was already rewriting the story. I didn't flinch. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look up. I just kept scooping potatoes onto my cousin's plate, nodding as if I hadn't heard him. But I had. Every word. Every pause. Every glance. It wasn't the first time he'd made a comment like that, but it was the first time I felt something shift inside me. Not anger. Not sadness. Just clarity. The rest of the meal passed in a blur. I heard laughter, clinking glasses, stories about promotions and new cars. I smiled when expected, nodded when appropriate, and kept my thoughts to myself. But beneath the surface, I was replaying that moment over and over. Not because it hurt, but because it revealed something I'd ignored for years. After dessert, I helped clear the table. My mother joined me in the kitchen, drying dishes while I washed. She glanced at me, her voice low. "He didn't mean it like that." I didn't look up. "He did." She sighed. "He's proud of you. He just doesn't know how to say it." I turned off the faucet. "He knows exactly how to say what he means. And that's okay. He'll understand soon enough." She didn't ask what I meant. She just nodded, sensing something had changed. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling. I thought about the students I'd mentored, the ones who came from broken homes, who struggled with learning disabilities, who didn't believe in themselves until someone did. I thought about the teachers I'd hired, the programs I'd built, the community I'd helped shape. I wasn't just a teacher. I was a leader, a builder, a guide. But in that dining room, I was invisible. My uncle had always been the loudest voice at family gatherings. He told the same stories every year: how his son got into Stanford, how his daughter was promoted at her firm, how his youngest was building something big in tech. His pride was palpable. His praise was selective. My children were rarely mentioned. My work was never acknowledged. I'd learned to stay quiet, to avoid conflict, to smile through the slights. But this time I couldn't let it go. 2 days later, I was in my office reviewing applications for a new teaching assistant. The stack was thick. Dozens of hopefuls, each with their own story, their own goals. I flipped through the resumes, scanning for experience, passion, potential. Then I saw it. His name. My uncle's son. I stared at the screen, heart steady, mind clear. The resume was decent. Not exceptional. A few internships, a degree in education, some volunteer work. He'd applied for a position at my school. My school. I didn't feel petty. I didn't feel vindictive. I felt prepared. I scheduled the interview. I didn't mention the connection to my staff. I didn't flag the application. I treated it like any other. But inside, I knew this meeting would carry a weight neither of us could ignore. That evening, I sat at my desk, watching the sun dip below the horizon. The playground outside was empty, the swings swaying gently in the breeze. I thought about the upcoming interview. I thought about the Thanksgiving toast. I thought about the difference between titles and impact. I wasn't seeking revenge. I was seeking recognition. Not from him. Not from the family. From myself. I'd spent years shrinking to fit into rooms that didn't know how to hold me. I'd smiled through dismissals, nodded through insults, and laughed through discomfort. But now I was done pretending. The moment was coming. And I would meet it with grace and truth. The next morning, I walked into the staff lounge and poured myself a cup of coffee. A few teachers were chatting about lesson plans and student behavior. I joined in briefly, then excused myself to prepare for the interview. I reviewed his application again. He'd listed his experience working with middle school students, his passion for inclusive education, and his interest in mentorship. It was solid. But what struck me most was the cover letter. It was earnest, hopeful, and respectful. He wanted to make a difference. I respected that. When he arrived, he looked confident. Dressed neatly, holding a folder, smiling politely. He didn't recognize me at first. I stood, extended my hand, and said, "Welcome." I'm Evelyn Weston, principal here. His face changed instantly, eyes wide, mouth slightly open. I smiled. Remember me? He nodded, stunned. I didn't know you were the principal. I gestured to the chair. Let's begin. The interview was professional. I asked about his teaching philosophy, his classroom management style, and his experience with diverse learners. He answered well, but his voice trembled slightly. I didn't press. I didn't gloat. I simply did my job. As he gathered his things, I said, "You're welcome to follow up with questions." He hesitated, then said, "I didn't realize you were in charge." I replied, "Most people don't. Until they need something." He nodded, understanding more than I said. That evening I sat in my office looking out at the playground. I thought about every student who'd ever been told they weren't enough. I thought about how I'd felt at Thanksgiving. And I felt resolved. I wasn't invisible. I was undeniable. The playground outside my window was still. Swings hung motionless, the slide glinted under the afternoon sun, and the faint hum of distant traffic filled the silence. I leaned back in my chair, the interview scheduled for 3 p.m. sharp. I'd reviewed his resume twice that morning. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted to be sure I was approaching this with fairness, not emotion. I hadn't told my staff about the connection. To them, he was just another applicant. I wanted it that way. No whispers. No assumptions. No distractions. I flagged a few gaps in his experience. Limited classroom hours, vague descriptions of student engagement, but nothing disqualifying. He was young, eager, and clearly trying. I wasn't here to humiliate him. I was here to do my job. At 2:59 I heard the knock. "Come in," I said, keeping my voice steady. He walked in with the kind of confidence that comes from not knowing what's ahead. Neatly dressed in a navy button-down, khakis, and polished shoes. He held a folder, probably filled with printed copies of his resume and references. He smiled politely, eyes scanning the room, then landed on me. I stood and extended my hand. "Welcome. I'm Evelyn Weston, principal here." His face shifted instantly. Eyes widened. Mouth parted slightly. He froze for half a second before recovering. Hi," he stammered. I smiled, calm and composed. "Remember me?" He nodded slowly. "Yes. I didn't know that I was the principal?" I finished for him. He nodded again, this time more firmly. "I didn't expect this." I gestured to the chair across from mine. "Let's begin." He sat down, adjusting his posture, trying to regain composure. I opened my folder and began the interview like I would with anyone else. "Tell me about your teaching philosophy," I said. He cleared his throat. "I believe in student-centered learning. Creating a space where students feel safe to express themselves and take ownership of their education." I nodded. "And how do you manage classroom behavior?" "I try to build relationships first. If students trust you, they're more likely to respect boundaries." His answers were solid. Not groundbreaking, but thoughtful. His voice trembled slightly, especially when I asked about working with diverse learners. He mentioned a volunteer program he joined in college, working with ESL students. I asked for specifics, how he adapted lesson plans, how he measured progress. He stumbled a bit but recovered. I didn't press. I didn't challenge him unnecessarily. I simply did my job. I wanted him to see that being a teacher, being a leader in education, wasn't something to dismiss. It wasn't a fallback. It wasn't a consolation prize. It was a calling. One that required strength, empathy, and resilience. As the interview wrapped up, he gathered his papers, still visibly unsettled. I stood again, offering a polite smile. "You're welcome to follow up with any questions," I said. He hesitated, then looked at me. "I didn't know you were the principal." I nodded. "Most people don't. Until they need something." He didn't respond right away. Just stared for a moment, then nodded slowly. "I understand." It wasn't a confrontation. It was a lesson. He left quietly, thanking me again before stepping out. I watched him walk down the hallway, shoulders slightly hunched, the confidence from earlier replaced with reflection. A few minutes later, one of my colleagues poked her head into my office. "Wasn't that your cousin?" she asked. I smiled. "Yes." "Small world." She raised an eyebrow. "Did he know?" "Eventually." She chuckled. "Bet that was a surprise." I didn't elaborate. I didn't share the Thanksgiving story. I didn't need to. That moment wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. I turned back to my window. The playground was still empty. A breeze rustled the leaves on the trees lining the fence. I thought about every student who'd ever been told they weren't enough. Every teacher who'd been dismissed. Every principal who'd been overlooked. I thought about how I'd felt at Thanksgiving, smiling through the sting, swallowing the insult, pretending it didn't matter. And I felt resolved. Not because I'd proven anything, but because I'd stood in my truth. That evening I stayed late at school. The building was quiet, the halls dim. I walked through the classrooms, checking bulletin boards, straightening chairs. In one room, a student had drawn a picture of a teacher with a cape. "My hero," it said in crayon. I smiled. In another room, a sticky note on the whiteboard read, "Thank you for believing in me." I paused. This was what mattered. Not titles. Not toasts. Not comparisons. I returned to my office, packed my bag, and turned off the lights. As I locked the door, I glanced back one last time. The desk. The window. The chair where he'd sat. It was just another interview. But it changed everything. The hallway lights flickered off behind me as I stepped out of the school building, my bag slung over one shoulder. The air was crisp, the kind that hinted at winter but hadn't quite committed. I paused at the edge of the parking lot, watching the last few cars pull away, their headlights cutting through the dusk. The interview had ended hours ago, but the weight of it lingered. Not heavy, just present. A week later, I was sipping coffee at my desk when the email came through. I recognized the name instantly. My cousin. The subject line was simple. "Thank you." I clicked it open, expecting something brief, maybe formal. But what I read surprised me. "Hi, Evelyn. I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to interview. I learned a lot from our conversation and appreciate the time you took to speak with me. I've been reflecting on what it means to lead with purpose, and I hope to carry that into whatever role I step into next. Warm regards. David." No mention of family. No assumptions. Just gratitude. Genuine and clear. I leaned back in my chair, rereading the message. For the first time, I saw him not as my uncle's son, not as the golden child paraded around at family dinners, but as a young man trying to find his way. He was growing. And so was I. The next family gathering came sooner than expected. A birthday party for my niece held at my sister's house. Balloons lined the fence, music played softly from a speaker, and kids ran through the yard with sticky fingers and frosting-smeared faces. I arrived with a gift bag and a quiet mind. I was standing near the drinks table, pouring lemonade into a paper cup, when I felt a presence beside me. I turned. "My uncle. I heard you interviewed my son," he said, his voice low. I nodded. "He did well." He shifted, clearly uncomfortable. "I didn't realize you were the principal." I smiled, not smugly, just gently. Most people don't. Until they need something. He didn't respond. Just looked at me for a moment, then nodded and walked away. His silence spoke louder than any apology. It wasn't remorse. It was recognition. And that was enough. Later that evening, I sat on the porch swing with my niece, watching the sun dip below the trees. She was 8, curious and chatty, her legs swinging back and forth. "Auntie Evelyn," she said, "are you really the boss of a whole school?" I laughed. "Yes, I am." Her eyes widened. "That's cool." It was a small moment, but it mattered. The next generation was watching. Listening. Learning what leadership looked like, not just in titles but in tone. In presence. In how you carry yourself when no one's clapping. I didn't post about the interview. I didn't share the story with friends. I didn't need validation. The moment had passed and I'd handled it with dignity. I'd shown what it meant to lead, not just in title but in action. That night as I drove home, the roads quiet and the sky darkening, I thought about that Thanksgiving comment. Just a teacher. I smiled to myself, the kind of smile that comes from knowing who you are. I wasn't just anything. I was a mentor. A builder. A guide. I was someone who shaped futures. And if that wasn't something to be proud of, I didn't know what was. The next morning I arrived at school early. The halls were quiet, the classrooms still. I walked through the building slowly, stopping to straighten a stack of books in the library, to pick up a crumpled flyer from the floor. I paused outside the staff lounge where a bulletin board displayed photos from recent events. Field trips, science fairs, Teacher Appreciation Week. One photo caught my eye. A group of students gathered around a teacher, laughing, engaged, alive. I recognized the teacher. She'd been hired last year, fresh out of college, nervous and unsure. I'd mentored her through her first semester, helped her find her footing. Now she was thriving. I stood there for a moment, taking it in. This was the work. Not the titles. Not the recognition. The impact. I returned to my office, opened my planner, and began preparing for the week ahead. Meetings, lesson observations, parent conferences. The usual rhythm. But something felt different. Not in the tasks, but in me. I wasn't waiting to be seen anymore. I was standing in my own light. And it felt good.